Hi, in this video I'm going to show you an interesting sound design technique using the new advanced Keygroup program editor. As you can see, I've got an empty project here, so I'm going to press and hold on our default drum program or drum track and delete this track. I'm going to press new track and create a Keygroup program. Next, I'm going to go to my browser and I'm going to go to places. I'm just going to go up one level and go into my samples folder, and from the filters along the bottom here I'm going to choose waveforms or samples, and I'm just going to type in saw. Now you can do this with any sample, but I thought I'd choose one of these very simple saw waves to demonstrate this, but you can use pretty much any sample as long as you can loop it over a short period of time. So let's choose this first one here. Now, embedded in the metadata for these particular samples is looping information. So let's load that in, and we'll see when we go to the program editor and the samples page and load this in that it's automatically set to loop. And if we press the gear icon in the top right hand corner and switch loop lock off, we'll see where this sample's looping. Now we can adjust this, but I'm just going to leave it as it is. And this is how this sample sounds. It's very short and buzzy. Now, because of how the play mode is set up by default for key groups, which is note on, that's why we get this very short stop when we release our finger off the pad. So the first thing that we can do, which is basic stuff, but for those of you that don't know, is just increase the release time, and this will ring out and it will sound a lot more pleasant. Now, an interesting thing that we can do with all of these envelopes for the amp, filter, pitch and auxiliary is loop them, and that's what's going to give us this interesting sound design technique. So let's switch looping on, and we're going to bring down the release and sustain. And let's just open up the larger editor, and you can see that hardly any sound is going to be let through, maybe just a tiny little quiet click. Well, actually it's going to be a buzz because we're looping the sample, but if we switch looping off just for a second, we could just hear a very short clicking sound. So let's turn the looping back on. Now, we can adjust the decay time to give us a longer loop, and that will give us this kind of rhythmic effect. So let's use the Q-Link to do that. Now what I'm going to do is use the modulation matrix to automate this being moved at random. Now unfortunately the modulation matrix can't modulate the decay, sustain and release, which are the most interesting parameters for this. We can add them as destinations to be modulated in the mod matrix, but for some reason it doesn't work the way that I want it to, which is basically emulating what I'm doing manually here. But we can modulate the time scale, which will give us that effect. So if we click on time scaling, we can increase this to 400% or reduce it all the way to 25%. So I'm going to put it at the bottom, and now we get it really, really short and buzzy. Let's move across to our mod matrix, and for the source, which is the modulator, we're going to choose LFO1. The amount is at 100, we can adjust that later on if we want. And the target is going to be our amplitude envelope timescale, which is just down here. So now, if we go to LFO1, let's take a listen how it sounds with this default sine wave. So already something quite a bit more interesting than just this looping over. But if we change the waveform to something like sample and hold or noise, so let's choose sample and hold. Now we're going to get random timing values. Now for me, this gets really interesting when you use very high pitches. So let's go up to bank D. And you start getting these really nice buzzy metallic ringing sounds, particularly if you use more than one pad. So what I'm going to do is just record this into the sequencer so I don't have to keep on pressing the pads. And then we're going to start adjusting the parameters in the amplitude envelope. We can also, of course, adjust the rate of the LFO. You probably can hear a gap every time this loops over, so we can fill that gap quite easily by going into the arranger and just making sure all of our notes are extended so they meet the end of the sequence. So let's just do edit end, and there you go. So this is where it gets interesting. If we go back to the amp envelope, we can start now playing with the release time and the decay time. We start getting these really nice kind of almost like chime metallic bell sounds. I'm going to now play with the release time as well. So it almost becomes like wind chimes. Now this combined with delays and reverbs is really good as well. So in the new Keygroup editor, unfortunately, we don't have an effects tab, which we did in the earlier version, or what we call the legacy version of the program editor. We can actually view that by pressing the legacy button. So if we do want to add the effects, we can do that from here and then just switch it back to the advanced editor. Or if you don't want to do that, you can go to the track mix. Depending on what MPC you've got, it's slightly different, but my button is here, and if I double tap it, it takes me to the individual Keygroup mixer. So this is the same thing. I can add an effect onto one of my 4 effect slots for this particular Keygroup from here. But let's go back to the program editor and switch it to legacy mode. Now, we're not going to actually add an effect. I'm just going to increase the send amount for return to. So for those of you that don't know, returns are 4 separate channels that we've got in MPC. So we've got 4 returns, and on each of those returns, we can add up to 4 effects. Now, by default in MPC, return to has got a delay effect on it. So if we use send to, it will send a portion of this sound or any other sound in your project. It will send it to the corresponding return, which is return to. So we're sending a portion of this to a delay. So let's just go to our track mixer, slide this across until we get to return to, and then choose effects, click on the delay, and we've got quite a short delay time. So one of my favorite delay times is quarter note dotted. And let's also increase the feedback to about 70. And now we should get some nice delay trails coming off our Keygroup sound. Now I'm not going to press play just yet because we haven't switched back to the advanced editor. So as you'll hear, we'll just get this straight tone because we aren't using any of the new features. So if you find that suddenly your nice glitchy sounds have disappeared, it's because you need to switch back. And that's probably why it's better to go here instead of switching on the legacy mode and just simply going to your sends and adjusting them from here. And now we get these nice echo trails coming off of our Keygroup. patch that we've made. So that's pretty much it, and of course we can play with all the other things like tuning, we can add more layers. So these effects will be added, because they're kind of global, to any other sample that we add. So let's just experiment with that and go to the browser. Let's clear the search bar, and maybe let's put something else rhythmic in there, like a drum break. Let's just choose any of these, that's fine. And let's add it onto layer 2 and just see what it sounds like. Now this isn't looping, so this might not behave in the same kind of way. So you can see it's just being triggered at the start because it's not looping. But if we loop it, let's just make it a bit shorter and turn looping on. So we can now play with this loop's pitch as well. So before I end this video, let's also play around with one of the other new interesting features, which is the Keygroup stack Unison and harmonizer modes. So let's just add some voices. Let's add maybe 5 and detune them and choose stereo spread and just experiment with this. Let's now switch it into harmonizer mode. We can't have those simultaneously, it's one or the other. And when you've activated the harmonizer, you need to go to the next page and see the settings. So down here we can switch on and off these 4 extra notes, and we can shift these notes and we can adjust the volume. So let's just increase the volume of the first one to almost the maximum and then play around with the tuning. So hopefully you can play and experiment with this yourself. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and please stay tuned for more sound design tutorials using MPC 3. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.